In the solemn atmosphere of the civil registry office, joy and excitement filled the air, but one moment darkened this bright occasion. Right in the middle of the ceremony, the mother-in-law decided to demonstrate her power over the young family. She loudly announced to all the guests, "The apartment I am giving to the newlyweds is registered in my name. So let this pauper not even dream about it," she said, demonstratively waving the documents in her hand. Hello, dear listeners, I am glad to welcome you to my channel. Today, I present to you a new and interesting story. Enjoy listening. Inga Borisovna Malakova, examining her reflection in the three-panel mirror of the boutique elegant lady, pursed her lips. The dress, costing 120,000 rubles, fit her flawlessly, emphasizing her slim figure, impressive for a 55-year-old woman. And yet, something was missing. Maybe a boucher, suggested the sales consultant. A pretty girl of about 25, wearing a professional smile that seemed permanently fixed on her face. "We have a wonderful collection." "No," Inga Borisovna snapped sharply. "I'm not getting dressed for my anniversary. I am the groom's mother, you understand? A mother, and the dress must speak for itself." The consultant, not losing her smile, nodded and rushed toward another rack of dresses. Meanwhile, Inga Borisovna took out her phone and snapped several selfies, scrutinizing the results with a critical eye. "At my son's wedding, every mother must look like a queen," she said, not addressing anyone in particular, but without overshadowing the bride, of course. She pronounced the last phrase with a special intonation, as if doing her future daughter-in-law a great favor. Overshadowing Liza would not be difficult, a gray mouse with no taste or sense of style. How Igor could have chosen someone like her remained a mystery to Inga Borisovna. After 3 hours of fittings, she settled on an emerald dress by an Italian designer. It cost 30,000 more than the original budget, but could one really save money on such an occasion? Besides, everyone had to see that the groom's mother was not some market woman, but a lady with impeccable taste and financial means. "Tamarachka, you can't imagine what kind of dress I bought," Inga Borisovna said, sprawling comfortably in an armchair while sipping a glass of semi-sweet champagne. "True Italy, handmade, and the lace, on the other end of the line." Tamara Leopoldovna, her friend since university days, murmured something approvingly. "Yes, the wedding will be a real fairy tale," Inga Borisovna continued. "Told you about the apartment, didn't I? The one I bought for Igor in Sunny Terraces. Can you imagine? A one-bedroom, but what a 1.3-meter ceilings, a view of the park. I ordered designer renovations." Tamara asked something, and Inga Borisovna's face tensed for a moment. "Oh, come on, dear, what difficulties?" She laughed nervously. "For my only son, nothing is too much. Yes, 4 million. But you know how prices have skyrocketed." She paused, listening to her friend, then lowered her voice. Even though she was alone in the apartment, "Well, yes, I had to get a little creative. I took out a 20-year loan secured by my own 2-room apartment, but you understand why, right? So that everyone knows Inga Malakova would spare nothing for her son. And what did that Liska bring into the family? Pretty eyes. In 5 years of marriage, they'll fade." Inga Borisovna laughed at her own joke. "And most importantly, Tamarachka," she whispered conspiratorially, "I registered the apartment in my name. I told them I'd re-register it after the wedding. But you know, anything can happen. What if they divorce? Or this girl from a simple family suddenly decides she's entitled to half the apartment? No, let them live on borrowed rights. They must earn my trust first. Then I'll think about it."
The conversation with her friend lasted almost another hour. Inga Borisovna managed to discuss all their mutual acquaintances. The wedding host, expensive but worth it. He had worked at the wedding of the vice-governor's daughter. And the photographer, brought all the way from Moscow. Can you imagine? Inga Borisovna remembered her first meeting with Liza as vividly as if it had happened yesterday, not a year and a half ago. Igor had brought the girl to Sunday lunch, having warned his mother in advance that it was serious. That day, Inga Borisovna arranged a real bride inspection. She cooked her signature beef stroganoff, took out crystal glasses, and laid the tablecloth she usually reserved only for New Year's. Not because she wanted to impress the girl, but to immediately establish the status of the Malakov family. Liza came with flowers, inexpensive chrysanthemums, which Inga Borisovna demonstratively placed on the far windowsill instead of the festive table. The girl was wearing a simple blue dress, without any jewelry except for a thin silver chain with a small pendant. "So, you work at a travel agency?" Inga Borisovna asked, studying the girl closely. "Yes, at Planet of Travel," Lisa smiled. "For 3 years already. I'm a sales manager." "And do they pay well?" Inga Borisovna pressed on, ignoring her son's warning glance. "Mom," Igor said quietly, "I'm just interested in her prospects." "And what do your parents do, Lizonka?" Liza, still smiling calmly, replied, "My father is a senior mechanic at a factory, and my mother is a saleswoman at a clothing store." "Oh, really?" Inga Borisovna drawled, cutting herself a piece of cake. "And your education?" "Economics faculty at the Pedagogical Institute." "Not a university?" Inga Borisovna utachnila with poorly concealed triumph. "At an institute," Liza answered just as calmly. "But I plan to get a second degree in tourism." "Plans are good," Inga Borisovna nodded condescendingly. "Igorek here also plans to defend his doctorate, for the 2nd year already." That was how the entire meeting went. Inga Borisovna asked sharp, barbed questions. Liza answered politely and briefly. Igor unsuccessfully tried to steer the conversation in a different direction. After the guests left, Inga Borisovna declared to her son without appeal, a simple girl from a simple family. No prospects, no polish. You could find someone better. Remember the Vershinin's daughter? With an apartment from her parents and a car? "Mom, I love Liza," Igor replied firmly, "and I'm going to marry her." But in his voice, Inga Borisovna heard the same uncertainty that had accompanied her son all his life. She sighed theatrically. "Do as you wish. You're a grown boy. Just don't say later that your mother didn't warn you." After that conversation, more than a year passed. Inga Borisovna did not stop trying to dissuade her son. But at some point, she realized that Igor was serious. And then, a new plan formed in her mind. If she couldn't get rid of the unwanted daughter-in-law, she would at least extract maximum benefit from the situation. That was how the idea with the apartment appeared, a grand gesture meant to show all relatives and acquaintances what a wonderful mother she was. It was especially pleasant to imagine the faces of the bride's family, simple workers who couldn't even buy their daughter a car, let alone an apartment. Inga Borisovna almost physically felt her social status growing in the eyes of others, and the fact that behind this beautiful gesture lay a huge loan and a mortgaged apartment, well, only she and Tamara Leopoldovna knew about that. And of course, the carefully prepared documents according to which the apartment remained the property of Inga Borisovna. A week before the wedding, Inga Borisovna invited Liza over for tea, supposedly to discuss final preparations. In reality, she wanted to evaluate her future daughter-in-law once more, and possibly hint at her superiority. "Have you bought the dress?" she asked, pouring tea into Chinese cups inherited from her mother. "Yes, about a month ago," Liza nodded. "And where?" Inga Borisovna raised an eyebrow. "Hopefully not in some ordinary bridal salon. They sell such cheap junk there." "It's a small salon on Lesnaya Street. They have a very good selection and reasonable prices." "Of course, reasonable prices." Inga Borisovna grimaced slightly. "I bought my dress at Elegant Lady. Do you know how much it costs? Even saying it feels awkward, but I'll say it. 150,000. Italian designer, by the way." Liza smiled politely. "I'm sure you'll look wonderful, Inga Borisovna." "Yes, I hope so," she nodded smugly, "and I'll be doing my hair at Madame Coco with Gennady. Do you know how much he charges? But for such an occasion, nothing is too much." The conversation continued in the same vein. Inga Borisovna listed her wedding expenses, barely hiding her pleasure while watching Liza's reaction. But the girl remained calm, which irritated the future mother-in-law. "And by the way," Inga Borisovna remarked casually, "I've already prepared the documents for the apartment. Such a surprise for you and Igorek." "Yes, he said you are very generous," Liza replied simply. "Generous?" Inga Borisovna laughed. "I'd do anything for my son. 4 million is no joke. And what about you? What will your parents give?" "They paid for half of the wedding banquet," Liza answered calmly. "But that's not the same as an apartment," Inga Borisovna said condescendingly. After Liza left, Inga Borisovna immediately called Tamara. "Can you imagine? She didn't even flinch, sitting there calmly while I talk about an apartment worth 4 million. But nothing At the wedding, everyone will find out that the apartment is registered in my name. Let's see how she sings then." Igor, who had overheard fragments of this conversation from his room, closed his eyes tiredly. He loved his mother, but lately it had become increasingly difficult to ignore her pettiness and snobbery. But he did not dare to confront her. The habit of agreeing with his mother, cultivated by years of her dominance, was too strong. After the wedding, everything will get better, he thought, convincing himself that his mother was just nervous, and that was why she behaved so badly. When he and Liza married and moved into the new apartment, everything would definitely change for the better. The wedding day arrived faster than anyone expected. From early morning, the bride's apartment was buzzing with activity. The makeup artist, hairstylist, photographer, everyone spoke at once, creating a sense of pleasant chaos. Liza sat by the window in a white silk robe, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her face was calm, but inside she felt an unfamiliar tension. Her mother, Anna Sergeyevna, fussed around her, constantly adjusting something: the veil, the curls, the folds of the dress. "Lizochka, you're so beautiful," she whispered, trying to hide her tears. "Dad would have been so proud of you." Liza squeezed her mother's hand gently. "I know, Mom." Her father had passed away 3 years ago after a sudden heart attack. Since then, her mother had carried everything on her shoulders alone. Liza knew how hard it had been for her parents to pay for their part of the wedding. That was why she had insisted on a modest banquet and no unnecessary luxury. But Inga Borisovna had insisted otherwise. "A wedding happens once in a lifetime," she had declared. "It must be grand. People will talk." People, in Inga Borisovna's understanding, were mainly her acquaintances, colleagues, and distant relatives, people whose opinions mattered to her far more than the feelings of the bride. At exactly 11 o'clock, Igor arrived with the groom's procession. He looked nervous but happy. When he saw Liza in her wedding dress, his face lit up. "You're incredible," he whispered, kissing her carefully so as not to ruin her makeup. The ceremony at the civil registry office was solemn and beautiful. Liza barely remembered the official's words, hearing only her own heartbeat and feeling Igor's warm hand squeezing hers. Everything was going perfectly, until the moment when the guests began to exchange congratulations. Inga Borisovna stepped forward, holding a folder of documents in her hands. She was wearing the emerald dress, her hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. She looked exactly like the queen she had imagined herself to be. "My dear children," she began loudly, making sure everyone could hear, "on this wonderful day, I want to make you a truly royal gift." She paused theatrically, glancing around at the guests. "As you all know, young families need their own home, and I, as a caring mother, took care of this in advance." She opened the folder and pulled out the documents. "I present to you an apartment in the residential complex Sunny Terraces." A murmur ran through the hall. Liza felt Igor tense beside her. "But," Inga Borisovna continued, smiling triumphantly, "since this apartment was purchased with my money, it is registered in my name. Of course, for now." She emphasized the last words. "So let no one think of laying claim to what does not belong to them," she added, looking directly at Liza. "Everything has its time. Trust must be earned." The hall froze. Liza felt as if the air had been knocked out of her lungs. She heard whispers, saw curious and shocked glances, felt her cheeks burning with humiliation. Igor turned pale. "Mom, what are you saying?" he whispered hoarsely. "I'm saying the truth," Inga Borisovna replied calmly. "There's nothing wrong with honesty. I'm just clarifying things so there are no misunderstandings later." Anna Sergeyevna stepped forward, her face white with anger. "How dare you?" she said quietly, but her voice trembled. "This is a wedding, not a courtroom." Inga Borisovna waved her hand dismissively. "I'm simply protecting my property." Liza stood still, gripping her bouquet so tightly that her fingers hurt. At that moment, something inside her finally snapped. She slowly raised her head and looked straight at her mother-in-law. "Thank you for your honesty, Inga Borisovna," she said evenly. "It's good that everything is clear from the very beginning." Her calm tone surprised everyone, including Inga Borisovna herself. Liza turned to Igor. I need some air, she said softly. I'll be outside. Without waiting for a response, she walked out of the hall. Her heels echoed loudly on the marble floor. Outside, she leaned against the wall and finally allowed herself to breathe deeply. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she wiped them away angrily. I will not cry, she whispered to herself. Not today. Behind her, she heard hurried footsteps. Igor came out after her. Liza, I'm so sorry, he said quickly. I didn't know she would do this, I swear. She looked at him closely, at his confused eyes, his tense face, his hands clenched into fists. I believe you, she said. But that doesn't change what just happened. He lowered his head. I'll talk to her, he promised weakly. She smiled sadly. You've been talking to her your whole life, Igor, and nothing has changed. At that moment, Anna Sergeyevna came outside as well. Lizochka, she said gently, you don't have to endure this. If you want, we can leave, right now. Liza looked at her mother, then back at the registry office doors. No, she said after a pause. We'll finish the ceremony. I won't give her the satisfaction of ruining this day completely. She straightened her back and took a deep breath. When they returned to the hall, the atmosphere had noticeably changed. The earlier joy was gone, replaced by strained smiles and whispered conversations. Guests avoided looking directly at the bride, some out of awkwardness, others out of poorly hidden curiosity. Inga Borisovna sat in the front row, composed and satisfied, as if nothing unusual had happened. From time to time, she adjusted her bracelet and exchanged approving glances with a couple of her friends. The ceremony continued. Signatures were signed, rings were exchanged, and the newlyweds were officially declared husband and wife. Applause followed, but it sounded forced and uneven. At the exit, guests lined up to congratulate the couple. Some offered warm words, others stuck to formal phrases, clearly unsure how to behave after the scandal. You held yourself with great dignity, whispered one of Igor's colleagues to Liza. You're very strong, said an elderly aunt from the groom's side, squeezing her hand sympathetically. Inga Borisovna approached last. Well, that's it, she said with a satisfied smile. Now you're officially family. Liza met her gaze calmly. Yes, she replied. Now everything is truly clear. For a split second, something flickered in Inga Borisovna's eyes, irritation or perhaps doubt, but it disappeared instantly. The banquet was held in an expensive restaurant overlooking the river. Everything was exactly as Inga Borisovna had planned. Live music, designer decor, crystal chandeliers, and a menu that read like a catalogue of excess. Liza sat next to Igor at the head table, smiling politely, thanking guests, raising her glass when necessary. Inside, however, she felt hollow. Igor tried to whisper words of support, but she could tell he was lost, unable to decide whether to side with his wife or continue submitting to his mother. Inga Borisovna, on the other hand, was in her element. She made several long toasts about family values, maternal sacrifice, and the importance of respecting elders. Each speech was accompanied by meaningful pauses and pointed looks in Liza's direction. Without parents, she proclaimed loudly, young people today would have nothing, no foundation, no future. Everything they have is thanks to us. Liza clenched her jaw. When it was time for the first dance, Igor led her onto the floor. The music was slow and romantic, but Liza felt as though she were dancing underwater. Are you okay? Igor whispered. I will be, she answered. Halfway through the evening, Anna Sergeyevna approached her daughter. I don't like the way she looks at you, she said quietly, glancing toward Inga Borisovna. Promise me you won't let her humiliate you again. Liza nodded. I promise. Later, when the cake was brought out, 3 tiers decorated with fresh flowers and gold leaf, Inga Borisovna once again took the microphone. And now, she announced, I want to remind everyone of another important detail. Igor stiffened. As the owner of the apartment where the newlyweds will live, she continued, I expect certain rules to be followed: order, respect, gratitude. The room went silent. This is inappropriate, Igor finally said aloud. Mom, please. Oh, don't be so sensitive, she laughed. I'm just setting boundaries. Liza slowly stood up. "May I say something?" she asked calmly. All eyes turned to her. "I want to thank everyone who came today," she began. "This day is very important to me, and I am grateful for every kind word and every sincere smile." She paused and looked directly at Inga Borisovna. "But I also want to say this. Marriage is not a contract of dependence. It is a partnership, and respect cannot be demanded. It is earned." A murmur swept through the hall. Inga Borisovna's smile froze. "That's quite a speech," she said coldly. "Let's hope actions will match words." "They will," Liza replied quietly. The evening continued, but the invisible line had been drawn. When the guests began to leave, Inga Borisovna approached Igor privately. "You're letting her talk too much," she said sharply. "Don't forget who helped you get on your feet." Igor looked at his mother for a long moment. "I haven't forgotten," he said, "but I also haven't forgotten what today is supposed to be about." For the first time, Inga Borisovna had no immediate reply. The wedding night passed in silence. After the banquet, the newlyweds returned not to the apartment in Sunny Terraces, but to a hotel room that Igor had booked in advance. At the time, it had seemed like a romantic gesture. Now it felt like a refuge. Liza sat on the edge of the bed, carefully removing her earrings. Her movements were slow and mechanical. "I should have stopped her," Igor said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Right there, in front of everyone." "Yes," Liza replied softly. "You should have." He lowered his head. "I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid of a scandal. Afraid of embarrassing you even more." She turned toward him. "But you didn't think about how humiliating it already was for me." He didn't answer. That night they slept facing opposite walls. A week later, they moved into the apartment. The apartment was beautiful, bright, spacious, with expensive renovations and new furniture. Everything smelled of freshness and money. But from the very first day, Liza felt like a guest. Inga Borisovna arrived with a spare set of keys. "I'll keep these," she said casually, "just in case." Igor hesitated, but said nothing. Rules appeared immediately. No shoes in the living room. Do not rearrange the furniture. I don't like this color of curtains. You're using too much electricity. She inspected shelves, checked the refrigerator, commented on Liza's cooking, and corrected her behavior. "This is not how Igor likes it. In our family, we do things differently. You should listen to me. I have experience." Liza endured. She woke up earlier, cooked breakfasts, kept the apartment spotless, tried to please. But nothing was ever good enough. One evening, Inga Borisovna found a receipt from an electronics store. "What is this?" she asked sharply. "A coffee machine for 30,000? "I bought it with my own money," Liza answered calmly. "In my apartment," Inga Borisovna emphasized, "without asking." Igor stood in the doorway, silent. "Next time, consult me," his mother said. "It will be easier." That night, Liza cried quietly in the bathroom, so no one would hear her. The breaking point came 3 months later. Liza came home early from work and heard voices in the living room. Inga Borisovna was there again. "And how much do you earn?" she was asking Igor. "That's not important," he replied tensely. "It is very important," his mother insisted. "I need to understand whether it even makes sense to register the apartment in your name." Liza froze in the hallway. "I'm thinking of postponing it," Inga Borisovna continued. "Times are unstable, and your wife hasn't exactly proven herself yet." "What does that mean?" Igor asked. "It means," his mother said coldly, "that she lives here thanks to me, and she should behave accordingly." Liza walked into the room. "No," she said clearly. "I live here as your son's wife, and I won't behave like a dependent." Inga Borisovna turned slowly. "Oh," she smiled thinly. "You finally found your voice." "Yes," Liza replied, "and I'm using it." There was a long silence. "You're forgetting your place," Inga Borisovna said quietly. "And you," Liza answered, "are crossing every boundary." Igor looked between them, pale and helpless. That night, Liza packed a suitcase. "I'm going to my mom's," she said. "I need space." Anna Sergeyevna met her daughter without questions. She simply hugged her tightly and led her into the kitchen. "Tea?" she asked softly. "Yes, please." They sat in silence for a long time. The familiar, modest kitchen felt safer than the luxurious apartment ever had. "I tried, Mom," Liza finally said. "I really tried." "I know," Anna Sergeyevna replied. "Some people don't want peace. They want power." Liza stayed with her mother for 2 weeks. Igor called every day, apologized, promised to talk to his mother, promised to change everything. But his voice always carried the same uncertainty. Inga Borisovna, meanwhile, did not call at all. On the 15th day, Igor came to Anna Sergeyevna's apartment himself. He looked exhausted. "She says you humiliated her," he began, "that you're ungrateful, that she invested everything in us." "And what do you think?" Liza asked quietly. He hesitated. I think she went too far." "That's not an answer," Liza said calmly. He sank into a chair. "I don't know how to choose," he admitted. "She's my mother." "And I'm your wife," Liza replied. "At least, I thought I was." The silence stretched. "If nothing changes," Liza continued, "this marriage won't survive. I won't live under constant control. I won't beg for the right to exist in my own family." Igor nodded slowly. "I'll talk to her," he said again. 2 days later, Inga Borisovna summoned both of them to her apartment. She sat in an armchair, hands folded, as if presiding over a court. "I'll be brief," she said. "Either you accept my rules, or you move out. I won't finance ingratitude." "We don't need your financing," Liza replied. Inga Borisovna laughed. "Of course you do. Without me, you have nothing." Igor suddenly spoke up. "That's not true," he said quietly. "We can rent an apartment. We can manage." Inga Borisovna stared at him. "You would choose this?" she asked sharply. "After everything I've done?" "I would choose my family," he answered. For the first time, Liza saw fear in her mother-in-law's eyes. "You'll regret this," Inga Borisovna said coldly. "Maybe," Igor replied, "but it will be our choice." They moved into a small rented apartment on the outskirts of the city. It was old, with creaking floors and a tiny kitchen, but it was theirs. Money was tight. Liza worked overtime. Igor took on additional projects. They argued, got tired, made up again. But Inga Borisovna was silent. No messages. 6 months passed. One evening, Igor received a message. "I'm in the hospital. Heart. Come." They went together. Inga Borisovna lay pale against the white sheets. Seeing them, she turned her face to the wall. "I suppose you came out of obligation," she said bitterly. "No," Igor answered. "We came because we care." She was silent for a long time. "I lost control," she finally said, "and I was afraid. Afraid of being unnecessary." Liza looked at her carefully. "Control isn't love," she said gently. The hospital room was quiet, filled only with the rhythmic beeping of medical equipment. Inga Borisovna looked smaller than before, as if the illness had stripped away not only her strength, but also her arrogance. "I gave everything to my son," she said quietly, without turning around. "My youth, my health, my life. And in the end, I was pushed aside." "No one pushed you aside," Igor replied. "You pushed yourself away when you tried to control everything." She closed her eyes. "You don't understand," she whispered. "When his father left us, I was alone, just me and a small boy. I had to be strong. I had to decide everything. Otherwise, we wouldn't have survived." Liza listened in silence. "But when strength turns into domination," she said softly, "it destroys love." Inga Borisovna remained silent for a long time. Then she slowly turned toward them. "I don't know how to live differently," she admitted. "I don't know how not to interfere." "That can be learned," Liza said, "if there is willingness." The doctor entered and asked them to step outside. In the corridor, Igor leaned against the wall and covered his face with his hands. "I never wanted to choose," he said hoarsely. "I just wanted everyone to get along." "Sometimes," Liza replied, "not choosing is also a choice." Inga Borisovna stayed in the hospital for another 10 days. During that time, Igor visited her regularly. Liza came only once more. When Inga Borisovna was discharged, She did not return to her usual life immediately. She moved slower, spoke less, listened more. A month later, she called Igor. Both of you. They met in a small cafe far from the places Inga Borisovna used to prefer. I sold the apartment in Sunny Terraces, she said suddenly. Igor stared at her. What? I paid off the loan, she continued. The rest, I transferred to you, for a down payment. The apartment will be in your names, both of you. Liza was silent. I don't expect forgiveness, Inga Borisovna added, and I don't expect gratitude. I just don't want to lose my son. Igor swallowed. Thank you, he said quietly. Inga Borisovna nodded, then looked at Liza. And you were right. Respect cannot be demanded. Liza met her gaze. It also cannot be bought, she replied. A faint, tired smile appeared on Inga Borisovna's face. A year later, Liza and Igor moved into their own apartment. It was smaller than the one in Sunny Terraces, but filled with light and peace. Inga Borisovna visited rarely. She called in advance. She no longer gave orders. Sometimes she still tried to advise, but she stopped herself halfway through. I'm learning, she would say. And for the first time, those words sounded sincere.